Hello, everybody. This is Nathan from Africa for Dummies Studios. Great to have you with us today. In light of the solemn remembrance of the genocide against the Tutsis, also known as Kwibuka in Rwanda, we have a special episode lined up for you. Joining us is the esteemed Samuel Ishimwe as our special guest. Together, we dive into Rwanda's history, examining its colonial legacy and other issues. Plus, don't miss out on our latest documentary about Rwanda, now available on our YouTube channel. Your support means the world to us, so be sure to leave a rating and subscribe across all platforms to stay updated on all things Africa. Thank you for tuning in.
I am an African.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Africa for Dummies. And this time we are commemorating the 30th anniversary since the tragic genocide in Rwanda. So around this time, 30 years ago, some of the worst tragedies in Africa's and human history was unfolding in Rwanda. Today we have an incredibly special guest. I think I'll let him introduce himself, but his name is Samuel Ishimwe. If you have seen him or heard of his voice, for those who are tracking Rwanda this past week, he's put out a really cool documentary on Deutsches Welle. I think I pronounced it properly. The German media house, DW, on his personal and also the historical context of the Rwandan genocide. He's a Rwandan himself. And so, yeah, welcome to the Africa for Dummies podcast, Mr. Samuel Ishimwe.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, so if you could just tell us what you do and just introduce yourself to the viewers, to the listeners, the viewers as well. So yeah, but to everyone who's engaged with the podcast.
Yes, as you said, my name is Ishimwe Samuel, and I was born in Rwanda and grew up in Rwanda also, still live there, at least partially. And I work as a filmmaker and also do another other cultural projects in Rwanda, but always in the field of cinema. But my main job is film writer, director. Yes.
Oh, nice. So, yeah, mainly in the filmmaking business, and
Yes, that's my job. Yes.
okay, nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, if we can just sort of get into it, this is 30 years is quite a milestone, I think. Both if it's a person, 30 years is a milestone for any type of institute, person, anything, it's a huge milestone. So if we can just sort of go back and understand the context and the history behind this before 1994, how is it, everyone normally asks, how is it possible for humans to do such egregious things? So if you could just lead us into the history and the context of the Rwandan genocide against the Tutsi.
So 30 years, as you said, is a big milestone because it marks also a generation. 30 years is what makes a new generation of a generational timeline. And so you asked me about the context, the historical context of the genocide. Obviously, for people who don't know, in 1994, from April 7th, 1994, a genocide against the Tutsi happened in Rwanda, and it was mainly the government of Rwanda at the time, which was led by some Hutu extremist group who started this campaign of really exterminating Tutsis, and also other Hutus who didn't really agree with this ideology of seeing the Tutsis as the invaders, seeing the Tutsis as people who should be blamed for all the problems of the country. And yes, in 1994, that's what happened. To shorten it, but many people know this history already, that in 1994, the genocide happened against the Tutsi, and over 1 million people were killed. So, but if you go to the historical context of that, we can break it down in two parts. There is the longer, let's say, the longer causes, or the more ancient root of that genocide. There's also let's say you can call it the more recent historical context of that. If you go to the older context, you can say that Rwanda is a special country because is among the few countries that existed as an entity way before colonialism. countries that we have today in Africa were formed by colonial powers. If you
Colonial
say
times, yeah.
Tanzania, yeah, Uganda, Kenya, these didn't exist as countries before, but Rwanda existed. Rwanda and Burundi existed as countries before the arrival of colonialism. So, and this is a society which existed for, let's say, 600 years before the arrival of the European colonialism. And there was never, this time there were, of course, there were wars and there were other stuff, but there was never any conflict between Hutus and Tutsis, because these were actually not ethnicities. It was more of a social status. If you are a guy who has more cows and you have more wealth, and you were a Tutsi, because Tutsis were people who, let's say, were in the aristocracy.
It was more like a class than.
And if you are, let's say, it was a class system. Yeah, it was a class system, and people could move. You could be a Hutu today, and tomorrow, if you did something and the king loves it and rewards you for your efforts, and all of a sudden you become a Tutsi. So it was a moving thing. It was not an ethnic thing.
So
that's why there was never any
mobility,
tension between. It was a social system, and that's why there was never. And actually, when I talked to historians, when I was doing the research of this film, they told me that actually this Hutu Tutsi was a really minor thing. People didn't identify themselves. If you ask somebody, let's say Samuel, who are you? The first thing I would say is my name, then my father's name, then my clan, because we have a clan system, which basically also is shared between Hutus and Tutsis. Then you would say which boss you serve, then you would say which area you're from. And the Hutu Tutsi thing was never anything people would identify themselves with.
Okay.
So it was really a minor thing. But then, of course, that's where I'm getting to the first let's say, first roots of the genocides. That when the German colonialists arrived, they said, "Oh, this is a society which is actually divided into 3 races." So they took these social classes and called them races.
Yeah.
So they said the Tutsis were a race, and this is something they did basing really on how people look physically more than anything. This is what I think triggered this thing, because of course they will take somebody who's tall and have thin features,
right,
and say this cannot be the same person as this somebody who's short, even though share the same religion and everything. Even though people share everything, they'll still say, okay, these people are different. And that's actually where the problem started, when they actually said there are 2 races, 2 distinct races.
Okay, so you talk about German colonialists arriving into Rwanda, and that's before that there was some sort of vertical mobility. The idea of Tutsi was just sort of a class assigned status and wealth. Now, if you just give us a glimpse into this stage that you say that's the sort of the beginnings of the roots of this animosity, how exactly did the German colonialism, and just for our audience, I'm assuming this is around the time of the scramble for Africa, the 1880s, 1884, 83. So yeah, if you can just give us a window into how the Germans run Rwanda and sort of tracing these roots of animosity.
Yes. So the Germans took control of Rwanda, I think was in 1897. Yes, it was right after the scramble for Africa and the Berlin Conference and all of that. It was 1897. And then, so the Germans, when they were ruling Rwanda, they didn't really involve themselves too much. They did what they call indirect rule. So they didn't really impose they didn't impose a lot of way in the management of the country. So they didn't change the structure of governance in Rwanda of the king at the time. But it's true that when they arrived, they really introduced these ideas of saying in Rwanda is a country that has 2 different races, and this idea was already planted. But the Germans didn't stay for long in Rwanda, because World War I happened, and it was the Belgians who took over. And when the Belgians took over, this is where really the problem started. This is where the things really got very problematic, because when the Belgians came, they of course followed in the ideology of saying Rwanda is composed of two different races, and something that was very fundamental, and I would say would really what changed everything is that the Belgians decided to change the way Rwanda was ruled and to impose their own way of governance. And in this way of governing, they said we're going to rule the country with only Tutsis. So they say that they say that the Tutsis were a superior race, and then therefore they're going to rule only exclusively with Tutsis. So what they did from the 20s, they removed all Hutu chiefs and they removed all Hutus from any governance or any leadership, political life, and only imposed a system where it was only the Tutsi elite who could govern. And this was really the beginning of the problem, because now you have the Hutus who are excluded from everything else, and you have a few Tutsis who only rule. And of course, you can see how this can already start a little bit of a problematic society when one person is put aside and the other is put in a position of power. So this is where the problem started, and of course, this went on for like 30 years, where with only the Tutsi allowed to rule, and Hutus excluded from any position of power until the 50s. Until the 50s, when the Tutsi elite starting to claim independence, because all over Africa, people were saying, okay, we need to be independent. And when the Tutsi elite, who were the political elite of the time, started doing that, the Belgians saw an opportunity actually to reverse the thing, to create, let's say, what they call divide and rule, where they said, okay, now the Tutsis are starting to cause problems. Let's go with the Hutu with the Hutu intellectuals and all of that. And this is what they started really teaching, that Tutsis have been oppressing Hutus for hundreds of years, even though it was the Belgians actually who removed the Hutus from all power. It was never the Tutsi. It was the Belgians who removed the Hutus from power. But then they blamed this on saying, look, Hutus, the Tutsis only ruled and they oppressed you, they excluded you from any power. And of course, you can understand that many Hutus believed in this because they know they were not included in power.
Yeah.
And this is something actually that I personally saw, and I saw the facts of this when I was doing the film in the Belgian museum, in the Belgian National Archives. I saw letters and documents that prove that how Belgians really removed the Tutsis, removed the Hutus from all power, and later on blamed the Tutsis for being the ones controlling. So that was really the start of the, let's say that was the start of the problems for the genocide. Yeah, and that's what I would call the far in history root causes, if I can summarize it.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually quite revealing, because now this is what now I'm learning, that the chiefs, they were also Hutu chiefs in that structure. So in terms of responsibility and management, maybe it wasn't particularly equal, but there was definitely a chunk of Hutus that were also managing, the pre-colonial Rwanda. But it's actually quite fascinating that the Belgians, on just purely sort of flimsical reasons, decided that these would be in charge. And now, in the sort of the global context, the Tutsis wanted to get independence. Were they sort of seen as a threat? Ultimately, it was sort of like the Tutsi elite. Were they sort of like the monster that the Belgians suddenly somehow created, and then they're like, oh, actually, I've changed my mind. Let's just create an underdog story to give the Hutus power?
Yes, that's more or less what happened, because at the time it was not only the Tutsis, because there were also many Hutus who were also part of that independence movement in Rwanda, who were, because at the time Rwanda was still a kingdom, so we had a king, and this king was one who was leading this like claim for independence, and who was really having a fallout with the Belgians. And of course, the Belgians said, okay, we need somebody who can be royal to us, because not all Hutus were, many Hutus were also against the Belgians. It's because they chose a few Hutu intellectuals who were, let's say, very loyal, very loyal to the Belgians, and say, okay, we're gonna put these Hutus in place, and they're gonna be very loyal to us, and we're gonna get rid of the Tutsis because they are starting to be the problem. They're starting to be a problem to our interests, and and that was already in the late 50s, and that's where the tensions and the problems started.
And so also, I mean, I'll go to there's I think one of the big marks is also the Hutu Revolution. But before that, is there also, in the sort of global context, was there also like a Cold War? Were the Tutsis pro-Eastern Soviet, or were the Hutus pro-Western? Was there any such dynamic, or is it just simply, like
that's very interesting, because one of the arguments that the Belgians used against the Tutsis was to say that the Tutsis were communists. And this was a very strong propaganda, because at the time, in order to really get rid of the Tutsis, they'll say they were communists, and they're also saying, of course, communists at the time were anti-religion. They're saying if these Tutsis rule, they're gonna remove the Catholic Church. So somehow the Catholic Church also did a lot of mobilization against the Tutsi elite of the time, calling them communists. That was actually a very big trend at the time. But I think let's say the king. I mean, it was not only really the Tutsis, because I mean it was mainly the Tutsi, because they're the one who were in power. But there are many Hutus who were in that movement also. It was not only exclusively a Tutsi thing. It was just like some nationalistic movement at the time who wanted Rwanda to be independent and to get rid of Belgians. And this nationalistic movement, of course, was seen as a threat, and they're calling them all kinds of names, saying, okay, they are communists, they are this, they are anti-Christian. Yeah, but for them, they are more nationalist than any. I don't think they were aligned with the West or the Eastern Bloc necessarily. I think they were more really like, okay, we just want to be independent for our nationalistic and traditionalistic also interests, because they wanted to maintain the kingdom and the monarchy, all of that. But I don't really think, of course, maybe some of them had communist ideas, but I think as a movement, there was I don't think they were.
It wasn't a big
that
deal.
Was it wasn't a thing really. It was more like a nationalistic movement more than anything. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. So now, then comes the, in the 50s, and then there's this. Whenever you see documentaries or stories on this, there's always the key moment is the Hutu Revolution. Now, what is the Hutu Revolution, and why is it such an important marker in this trajectory towards the 1994 genocide?
Yes. Yeah, so in the Hutu Revolution, the so-called Hutu Revolution happened in 59, and this was a turning point, because also this is the time where the first violence has happened. And what happened was that at the time, a few Hutu intellectuals who had been who evolved through the Catholic Church and the Catholic Church schools were being very critical, and they were saying the Hutus have been oppressed, want to be part of of power, want to be part of this, which I think initially was not a bad idea, because obviously Hutus have been excluded from power by the Belgians. But the problem is that the intelligentsia, the people who led this movement, namely former President Gregoire Kayibanda and others, instead of doing a social revolution where they say, okay, we're going to put up a system which includes everyone, they turned into a tribal ethnic thing. They said, okay, the Tutsis are the problem, even though the majority of Tutsis were not even in power. Actually, the majority of Tutsis had the same life as any Hutu. This Tutsi elite was really, let's say, maybe, I don't know, 10% of even the Tutsi population. For example, me personally, my own grandparents were not in any government. They didn't have a lot of land or a lot of cows. They were just normal peasants, But because they turned this, first of all, they called it the Hutu Revolution. It means it excluded all the Tutsis. They said the Tutsi are the problem. They're the invaders. They came here from Ethiopia. They came to colonize us. They oppressed us for hundreds of years. Now we have to get rid of them. We have to get rid of the monarchy and get rid of the Tutsis. So it is in this time that really let's say the anti-Tutsi rhetoric started with this Hutu revolution. That's why That's why they wrote what was called the 10 Commandments of Hutus. There was a guy called Gitera Joseph, who was also a Hutu intellectual, who was part of this revolution, who wrote what they call the 10 Commandments of Hutus, in which he said you shall not marry a Tutsi, you shall not trust a Tutsi. A Tutsi is your enemy. And this was really the first time a genocidal language was had to be used.
And this was in the 1950s.
Those was specifically in 1959. And this so-called Hutu revolution was, of course, supported by the Belgians. So at the time, also something important happened is that the Belgium really, that's what they supported this movement, and then there was a referendum in which they voted against, they abolished the monarchy, and they put in, let's say, a presidential system, a republic. And in this time, when they were doing this, something else happened. There was like spread out violence against the Tutsis, and many hundreds of thousands, I think, actually, it was more than 100,000 Tutsis were exiled in neighboring countries because they were targeted by their Hutu neighbors, because they were now labeled as the problem, as the enemies of the republic, and all of that. And also at this time, the Belgians helped create the first national army of Rwanda.
Yeah.
And in this army, exclusively excluded Tutsis from this army. There were only very few Tutsis here and there who managed to get in because they knew somebody who knew somebody, but it was pretty much exclusively Hutu army, and this was done by the Belgians also. So this is the time really where the problem started, because at the end of the Hutu revolution, you had a new government, and you had Hutu extremists in power who labeled the Tutsis as a problem, and you also at the same time had tens of thousands of Tutsis exiled in neighboring countries. And that was really the start of the start of problems, the start of tensions, and start of unrest, and all the kind of problems that followed up until 94.
Yeah. And so then basically independence was produced on a very basically was produced on Hutu power terms, and a Hutu sort of dominated political system.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's very funny you mentioned the independence, because it's very funny when actually independence happened. There's one book I read that was written by the guy who was the let's say what they call the colonial resident, or the colonial administrator of Rwanda, a Belgian guy. He wrote a book about that.
Yeah.
And he in the book he put two letters. One letter was written by the president of the time, Kayibanda, who was the head of this Hutu movement. And this guy, in his letter on Independence Day, in his speech, on his letter, he said, "Oh, we are very sad that the Belgians are leaving because now we're going to have to deal with the Tutsis, and thank you for helping us getting rid of the Tutsis, but we're very sad that you're leaving." And you also have another letter from now the Tutsi who are now, let's say, exiled, who are now let's say in opposition or exiled, who are writing that we are happy that the white man is out. We are happy that this colonizer is out. But it's very telling that now the person who was the president was actually crying that the Belgians are leaving, and now they have to deal with their Tutsis who are their brothers. So it already shows you in what context the independence happened. It was really a shadow independence, and which would keep the Belgians very influential in Rwanda, and as much as they wanted in the first place. Yeah.
So Kayibanda was almost very much Belgium's guy, and the fact that he saw his own sort of countrymen more as aliens compared to the colonialists is quite shocking, and it actually recalls also, like, events at a similar time in South Africa. There were some
Mm-hmm.
Zulu nationalists who were
Yeah.
very aggrieved against Mandela being a
Mm-hmm.
Xhosa. And they said,
Mm-hmm.
apartheid, we can survive apartheid, but we're not going to be run
Ah.
by Xhosas. You know, obviously there was no genocide there, but it's
Yeah.
very telling, some of the extent of this
Mm.
sort of tribal ethnic type of hatred. Even though,
And
yeah,
yeah, it's true, and it's something that is really also, I think, more of a, not even on an ideological level. It's more like a political gain thing, because of course now they knew that if they get rid of the Tutsis, they have more control of the country. They have an easier time ruling the country, and so it was more also a political game
yeah,
to be in power and to get rid of who could be their challengers, who could be the whatever, and be in power.
yeah,
And as long as the Belgians were helping them, they didn't care if their brothers are out or whatever. They just wanted to be in power. And
yeah,
also, it was easier for them because any problems that was in the country, they could easily blame it on the Tutsi, and don't
yeah,
have to take any responsibilities. Yeah.
yeah. So now this sort of period of, and it's funny how many of these things are in 30-year intervals. I think
Mm-hmm.
almost 30-year intervals, I think. Uh,
Yes.
but there's two presidents. There's the Habyarimana, but
Mm-hmm.
I saw somewhere in a documentary and in a book that
Mm.
they're both pro-Hutu presidents. But why
Yes.
did one overthrow the other? Was there sort of some sort of internal rivalry between the Hutu
Mm.
dominance and Hutu power? Now that they've kicked out the Tutsis or marginalized them to the extent of, non-competitiveness, was there any
Yes,
interest
absolutely.
among the Hutu elite themselves?
Yes, absolutely. So when now the Hutus got in power, this Hutu elite got in power, and it was Kayibanda who was president. There was also now the problem became a regional problem. So there was a problem between the Hutus of the south and the Hutus of the north, and the Kayibanda was a Hutu from the south, and in his government, in position, he really privileged Hutus from the south like himself, and the Hutus of the north were mainly in the army and not really much involved in anything. So there was some type of like competitiveness and animosity and internal turmoil even within that Hutu elite.
Mm,
And eventually, so Kayibanda came to power in 62,
yeah.
and in 73, that's when Habyarimana, who was the president of the, who was actually, he was the chief of the army.
Okay.
That's when he staged a coup against him and removed him. And this was really more of an internal problem, and but also based very much also on the regional racism. I would say, they say like the Hutus from the south are taking everything, the Hutus from the north are excluded,
Mhm.
and it's in that climate that he was deposed. But I think ideologically they had the same ideology, and really when Habyarimana took over,
Yeah.
pretty much nothing changed in regards to the Tutsi situation and to the lives of the Tutsi. They were kept outside of the political life, and those who were in exile were refused to come back, and those who were in the country were excluded from country privileges. So nothing really changed coming to the Tutsi, even though when Habyarimana took power, actually, he was saying that he's taking power to create a more egalitarian society and to give
Yeah.
more he stood the Tutsi and all of that, but he actually ended up doing even worse for the Tutsis than what Kayibanda did.
Hey there, everyone. I hope you are all having a great time listening to the podcast. I know I am. Don't forget to connect with us on all platforms and show your love by leaving a rating or a like. Your support means everything to us, and we're incredibly grateful for it. Now back to the podcast.
Okay, so Habyarimana is president, and then there's coffee prices, and all of those things sort of melted all together and sort of creates the supposed moderate Habyarimana is not as he seems to be. And you talk about the quotas and all of those things, and how the marginalization is actually even worse than it was under the previous president, both Hutu power presidents. Now, if it's possible, could you just explain the immediate events leading to the genocide in April 1994? And we have seen various accounts, and I've seen obviously the movies Hotel Rwanda, 100 Days, and all of those things. But in most cases, this is described from, some of them are from a Western angle, but some of them are sort of dramatized. I think maybe 100 Days was more Rwandan. But how did the Rwandan sort of experience it? How did you, or the people at least experience it? Was it something that, and I know in your documentary, you said it was like a normal thing. I don't know how it wasn't a gigantic, yes, we are in a genocide. So yeah, if you can walk us through the immediate events leading to it and the perspective of a Rwandan particularly.
Yes. So the thing that immediately led to the genocide in '94, it was, as you said, in the late '80s, the Habyarimana regime has been really starting to face some internal problems on an economical standpoint, but also some people trying to question democratic processes of the regime. But the main reason, the main challenge for the Habyarimana regime was the growing number of refugees in neighboring countries, the Tutsi refugees who fled in '59. Some of them who fled as kids now were grown up, and they had now started a movement to start to claim their return back to the country. And so they did it first before, but they was denied to come back in. There was an instance where the Ugandan government under Milton Obote chased away Rwandans, and when they came in Rwanda refused to take them in as citizens. So this also accelerated the armed struggle of Tutsi refugees in neighboring countries. So this is what led to the creation of the RPF, the Rwanda Patriotic Front, which was a movement of Rwandan refugees, mainly Tutsi refugees, who started this campaign to come back in Rwanda by force, by armed struggle. So, and this happened in October 1990. Okay. So in October 1990, that's when the RPF started the war against the regime of Habyarimana. And this war, when it started, that's really where everything went. Really, things became very, very difficult for Tutsi population, because even though before Tutsi were excluded from education, from politics, they could somehow have almost a normal life, a little bit of normal life,
like a second class, non bothered life.
Yes, they were excluded, but they still could do some business. Nobody was maybe attacking them too much. But now, when the war started, they said, look, the Tutsis are coming back to take back the country. And then they blamed every Tutsi person for the RPF war, because every Tutsi inside the country was seen as an accomplice of the RPF movement. And this also something also later on happened in '91, where there was now Habyarimana accepted multi-partyism, accepted many parties, but he also kind of created some parties who were like friends to him and who were very, very extremists in this Hutu power ideology. And in fact, the idea Hutu power, this word Hutu power came from the fact that in the early 90s, during the RPF war, there were many opposition parties, many of which actually were created by also Hutu people who were against Habyarimana.
Right.
But Habyarimana somehow managed to approach them and to buy them in. And that's where this narrative came. It said, okay, whatever party you are, if you are a opposition party or Habyarimana's party, as long as you are Hutu, we should all be one and create this Hutu power ideology because the enemy is one and the enemy is the Tutsi.
But it was like a war type of government.
Sorry?
So it was like a war type of government, like unite against the common enemy, sort of.
Exactly, yeah. So Habyarimana managed to really push this ideology that the enemy is the Tutsi. The enemy is not Habyarimana. The enemy is not even like a soldier. Is every Tutsi somehow is a conflict. So this rhetoric became really, really, really intense from 1990, from the time RPF started the war. And every time the RPF was advancing in some areas, in some government-controlled areas, Tutsis would be killed, even though they had nothing to do with the RPF, even though they didn't even know anybody in the RPF. And this really started a climate of strong animosity. And one of the reasons why Habyarimana did this thing was also because he knew, because at one point the RPF was becoming stronger, and he knew at one point he had to do peace talks with the RPF, and maybe it could also lead to elections. And in order to also consolidate his power, he said, it's better now that I turn into, I double down on the ethnic card, because Hutus are the majority. If I manage to unite all Hutus and say the Tutsi is the enemy, I'm going to stay in power, and we're going to push this idea that Tutsis are outsiders, they're invading us. So they did all this. That's why they created a radio. There's an independent radio that was created, but which was, Habyarimana was one of the main financiers of this radio. And this radio also helped pushing this ideology. So all this happened from 1990, and it was in a period of 4 years, from 1990 to 1994. This really became really, really tense. That's when Habyarimana created also this youth militia called Interahamwe, which was the party militia, and who were very, very violent against Tutsis, but also against other opponents of Habyarimana's regime.
Yeah. And
things really became super, super tense. And there were already some killings going on. For example, in the region where my father is from, there were killings even before the genocide. In 94, there were some killings which were happening as a result of that ideology. And there was also this famous speech by this guy who was a party leader one of the party leaders of Habyarimana's party, who brought back this rhetoric that the colonial people were talking about, that Tutsis came from Ethiopia, Tutsis came from the north, and he actually said the Tutsis, we're gonna send them back to Ethiopia through the rivers and through the waters. They're gonna go back through the Nile and go back to Ethiopia. So this rhetoric of painting the Tutsi as the enemy of the country, as the foreigner also, became really, really intense. And so this went on, but at the same time, there was like peace accords going on, because Habyarimana, of course, was obliged to negotiate with the RPF because he was losing ground on the military level. So he was really forced to negotiate with the RPF.
And this is the Arusha Accords.
So the Arusha Accords came in 93.
Okay.
And this is where actually the Arusha Accords came into effect, and then they signed it in 93, RPF, and they signed that RPF would share power with Habyarimana regime, and then actually they're going to also integrate the government and integrate the army, and then it's going to be a democratic process right after. It's going to be transitional government, and then later they're going to be elections and all of that, and then it's going to lead to an inclusive thing and all of that. But this, of course, this is why also extremism came really strong, because when these Arusha Accords were going on, there were many people in the Hutu extremist camp who were super against these accords, because they didn't want to share power with their PF and with the Tutsis. So this really became very strong, and all this hate, anti-Tutsi hate and rhetoric became very strong. And now the trigger event is that the plane of the president Habyarimana, when he was actually coming back from Arusha from signing these accords, I think, or maybe he was signing another amendment of the accords, I think. At least he was coming from Tanzania from this process to take part in this process. His plane was shot down, actually near his hometown, actually near his house. Actually, his plane was shot, and really the plane fell into his backyard, and it was near the airport of Kigali. And this was on the 6th of April 1994. So when this plane was shot down, of course, it was the trigger thing, which now the extremists said, okay, look, the Tutsis have killed Habyarimana, even though there was no evidence that it was even the Tutsis who killed him.
Yeah, it's quite a mystery, that one. I don't know. It is different.
It's
quite controversial.
Yes, they haven't been yet any. I mean, there hasn't been yet any conclusion on that. There've been reports, different reports, but there has been not like an agreed on thing. But when this happened, of course, the army at the time, kind of in the night of the 6th of April, the army and the extremist side of the army kind of took control of power, because they killed other Hutu political opponents. For example, they killed the prime minister, who was also a Hutu, but from the opposing party. And they killed her. Yes, it's Agatha Uwiringiyimana.
Yeah.
And she was the one who was supposed actually to be, I think she was the one who was supposed to now be the one in power, the one who to lead the government now that the president was dead.
And was she more moderate?
She was very moderate, actually. She was very moderate, and she was against Habyarimana, and she was, of course, she was also for now the inclusion and for the more inclusive society, and she was really one of the toughest opponents of Habyarimana. And she had become prime minister, of course, also as part of these negotiations that were going on and the pressure that Habyarimana was getting. And she was killed, of course, by the army, the Habyarimana's army, and they also killed other politicians in the same night. So they kind of really controlled power in that same night of the 6th of April.
Yeah.
And then from that day on, they said, okay, now the Tutsis have killed Habyarimana, have killed the president. They have to die. They are the enemy. They have to die. And that's where really the extermination campaign against Tutsis started. But something to also note is that this, as opposed to what many people say, that this was a reaction of people, just because they heard the president was killed, they just reacted. This was actually something that was planned for a while, because one of the people I talked to during the documentary I did is General Romo Dallaire, who was a UN peacekeeping mission commander.
The famous general.
The famous general, yes. And he had like a few months before this genocide happened, and before the plane was shot down, he had received actually information from an informant who told him that there has been a lot of preparations and training of the militia to be able to kill 20,000 Tutsis every minute or something like that. And this is something that he received as information.
20,000 Tutsis everywhere?
I think it was every minute, yes.
Wow.
In the report he got, yeah.
Wow.
And he sent, was it every minute or every day? I have to check the exact number. But anyway, the thing is that he had received the number that they were able to kill lots of Tutsis in a short amount of time. And he got this information right before all this started. And he sent this information to New York, to the UN uh, headquarters to warn them, like, please, there's something that is going on in Rwanda that could really lead to something really, really dreadful, and nobody wanted to. They kind of dismissed it. And when actually the plane was shot down, this whole plan came into action. So it was really a very well orchestrated extermination campaign. There were lists of people. They knew every Tutsi where they lived. They had names. They had a list.
And they had ID.
And they had
the ethnicity was in your ID card, huh?
It was in the ID card, yes, but they really also had the list because they knew, because there were meetings before that in which people were designed, like, okay, this person lives in this house, this person lives in that house, this person lives, so that they know where to attack and who dies, who needs to be killed. So just to say that this didn't happen as a reaction of the death of the president. It was not spontaneous at all, even though, of course, the shooting of the plane kind of like accelerated that process and really kind of gave a signal for people to stand up and start that extermination campaign. And that is how the genocide really started on the 7th of April and went on for 3 months.
And then, so on a personal sort of angle, how do ordinary Rwandans, how did ordinary Rwandans go through this or survive this period of time? And I understand that you are also personally a survivor of this series of events during these days. And how old were you at that time?
When the genocide happened, I was very young. I was 2 years old, so I don't have any memory of the genocide itself because I was 2 years old.
Yeah.
And but it affected me, of course. I lost my parents, and really like a big part, almost a big part of my family, maybe like 75% of my family, of my extended family, were killed. For example, in my on my father's side, there were 11 siblings, and my grandma also, there were 12. Only 3 survived from my father's family. Yeah, only 3 survived. And then many people who I was related to were killed. Actually, it was a small minority who survived, and this was the same for the majority of Tutsi people who were in the country at the time. So it was really like a horrible time. I mean, everybody who was alive that time was affected. People had obviously the Tutsi population at the time were targeted, but also some Hutus. There are many Hutus who were against this ideology, who were against Habyarimana's regime, but also who were against this idea of killing their neighbors, killing their brothers. Many of them were also killed. And there are people who try to hide the Tutsi. So everybody who was kind of associated with the Tutsi was also a target. Yeah. But the main target was the Tutsi as a people. So yes, of course, this had like tremendous consequences even today, because now you have when there's 1 million people who are killed in such a small period of time, there is a lot of consequences, either from people who survive it and also people who committed it, because the genocide actually, those who were doing the actual killing were mainly young people, uneducated people who were of course radicalized and pushed by the political elite of the time. But those who actually did the execution were normal people. It was not like soldiers, even though soldiers of course also did it, but it was mainly normal population. And of course, this had also consequences on them and also on their families. Now you have people who have parents who participated in the genocide, who have to live with that shame. Yeah. So it really kind of really broke the fabric of society in many different ways. Yeah. With that amount of loss of life, and kind of really also destroyed the unity and the trust. And so it was really, I mean, the consequences of the genocide are still being, I think, studied even today on the psychological level, economic level, on all kinds of levels. It's something that is still being trying to be understood even today.
Yeah, and then that's very very powerful because the even the manner in which it was, and them being very young, the fact that you have to live with it, and the like when you look at the Holocaust in
Yeah.
Germany, and I'm sure you're familiar, obviously, because
Mm,
you have been staying there for a bit. Uh, it
mm,
was done sort of like, I mean, I'm sure people knew that there was mass killing going on, but it was quite a remote,
mm,
concentration camp, gas, maybe one or two Nazi or SS officials are the ones that throw in the gas. But whereas in
mm,
the Rwandan genocide, there was a professor from Uganda, Mamdani, he said it was very communal.
mm,
It was like your neighbor, and then you could have maybe
mhm.
five people kill one person. It wasn't.
Yes.
So that was also very, very frightening. The capacity uh, for someone who maybe you live with and you see every day.
Yes, absolutely. That's what also, yeah, makes the genocide in Rwanda kind of also, that's the uniqueness, let's say, of the genocide in Rwanda, is that it was really done by normal people mainly. As you said, in Germany, it was done, let's say, in a way of the military organizing and engineering an extermination campaign. Even though, of course, even in Germany, there were people who were involved, normal people, civilians who were involved in let's say, reporting people and giving them up authorities, but the actual killing was done by a military machine. But in Rwanda,
Mhm.
it was really the people, and people were not even killed, like, let's say, like in extermination uh, facilities or something like that. It was all done like in your house, in the street, in everywhere. So and this had really, and many people actually, I talked to a few people who actually were killers, who were perpetrators, who
Mhm.
told me that, okay, uh, they told me if I don't do it, they will kill me. So I chose to do it. So obviously, it's a very coward thing to do,
Yeah,
to choose to kill people, because but at the same time, it shows you also that there was a level of really the will of the authorities to really push people,
Mhm.
even those who were not, let's say, convinced ideologically to do it, had to do it, because if you don't do it, you might seem that you're supporting the enemy at the time, which was seen as the Tutsi and all of that. So it's something that really like created a lot of issues also on family levels. You had people who killed their in-law families. It
yeah,
really created all kinds of messed up conflicts even on the family level, because as I said before, Tutsi and Hutus are not really two distinct groups. You might be Tutsi and your cousin is Hutu because
I'm
his father
married.
was Hutu, and yeah, so it's really, it really broke the fabric of society
Yeah,
to the lowest, to the most basic level, to the family level.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think I'm also quite curious, sort of how does a 2-year-old, how did you manage to survive that as a 2-year-old through the all of days? I think officially it's 100 days, maybe it was even more. How did you manage to survive through that? And sort of where have you sort of come through now, and have you understood it or like reconciled it yourself?
I mean, we survived really. I mean, it's surviving is always a miracle. Surviving something is always a miracle, because I mean, we survived mainly because our parents, me and my brother was even young. I was 9 months, and when our parents were killed, it was right at the beginning of the genocide. So people had not gone so far already to start kill children as much as they did later on.
Okay.
And so when they killed our parents, uh, actually they also wanted to kill us, but our 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 um, our nanny, who was like our nanny, who she was the one who was taking care of us. She was a young woman, was 20 years old.
Yeah.
Managed to escape with us, because actually she was also a Tutsi herself, but because physically she didn't fit the stereotype of a Tutsi,
Wow.
they thought she was Hutu, and because she was from the countryside, nobody knew her. And
Yeah.
while they were debating killing us or not, some of them started going to loot the house to
Yeah.
get all kinds of stuff at the house, and that's when she ran away because for the moment they got like they raced to go into the house and start looting all kinds of stuff, and then in that moment she kind of escaped, and we were hidden by some of our neighbors, and then we moved from one neighbor to another neighbor, and then we stayed hidden there for a while until the RPF soldiers took control of that area we were hiding, and then that's how they evacuated us. Yeah. And yes, and in this, of course, this is something all this series during the genocide, I don't have memory of it myself because I was 2 years old. Something that, of course, people who were hiding together with told me, and yeah, and yes, something I had to live with and learn more and more. Even today, I'm still learning parts of what we went through the genocide. Even today.
Yeah. So then, how do over time? There's obviously, like like I, for example, if I was Rwandan, I wouldn't have been born during the genocide. I'd have been born after. So how do most like young Rwandans, Gen Zs, I heard there's a new term now, zillennial. There's the crossover between millennials and Gen Z. This is in the 90s.
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, so the so-called zillennials, the Gen Zs,
yes.
how do they understand this? Because there's, Rwanda is as much as it's well known and ambitious, it doesn't take that much for a small country to be brandished as one thing. Like, Ugandans, immediately people say Idi Amin. And Rwandans, obviously, they say the genocide. So how are they reshaping this understanding? First of all, how do they understand this genocide? Do they cherish it in the same way that those who lived through it do? Or is it different? And how are they sort of reshaping the understanding of the Rwandan story, especially after the genocide?
Yeah, so there is two things to it. There is, I mean, the history of the genocide is very much talked about in Rwanda. It's taught in school. There's always like a lot of information about it. So, of course, people who were born after genocide learn a lot about the genocide also from school, from TV, from discussions, from all kinds of stuff. But there is two things. There is what you learn from school and what you learn from the history, but there's also what you learn from your own family.
Okay.
What your parents tell you, and this of course makes a difference even among that generation. So there are people. I was surprised myself to know that there are kids who are born 12 years, 10 years after the genocide, and who still, for example, identify themselves in these divisions because their parents at home, that's what they tell them. They tell them, look, these people did this, these people, we don't like them, these people like that. So we can't say they're completely out of it because obviously what your parents tell you, what your close family members tell you matter a lot in shaping your ideology. Yeah, but I would say that now, because of course, obviously, the whole Tutsi Hutu thing is not in the identity card. There's no way you can tell somebody's Hutu or Tutsi unless you maybe ask around about his family history. But there is no official record. Or these ethnicities are not anymore in official records in identification. And secondly, there's a great campaign of really teaching people that we are Rwandans, we're not Hutus, we're not Tutsis, and I think this kind of really has an impact. And I think the majority of people the young people, I think majority of them really don't see themselves in those lenses of Hutus and Tutsis. I think majority of them think that it's something that was horrible that happened to their parents, to their older brothers, and I think I think also for them is something that is really of an ancient mindset. Majority of them, but also I have to say that of course, again, the importance of the education, the family education, also makes it that there's some even younger people, Gen Z people, who still see themselves in this ethnic ethnic identities and the ethnic division ideology. So because of what they're taught at home. Yeah, so it really depends on those factors. But the way today people go around, the way people live together, friends, going out, I think the mood in Rwanda right now is to, I think even for young people, what I see is that people try to, the priority for them is not Hutu or Tutsi. The priority for them is to really try to make a good living, make a business, study hard. It's really try to make it, as they say, and have a good life, make some money, buy your father or your. I think that's the number one preoccupation, and this Hutu Tutsi thing, I think for them is not as important. I think it has a small role in their lives. Maybe for like us who lived through it, who were immediately affected by it. For us, I think it was a bigger thing in our upbringing. So I think it's like that. Different priorities, different way of seeing it.
Yeah. So I like how you've explained the generational divide. Yeah, I only have like two questions left. This one is to do just hopping off that one, the generational divide, and then how everyone is sort of like, it's no longer a priority. Yeah, your ethnicity and so on. And you're talking about those who are more, maybe it was a bit bigger for those who are like more directly, have sort of almost lived experience through the genocide. I wanted to ask a question that I know for myself, I'll definitely say no, because from where I'm sitting, I just can't even begin to imagine. There's a series of reconciliation, and Rwanda seems to have done quite a lot, even though I think there were some concerns, but they seems to have verified that process. So, on you, on a personal level, do you feel like you have reconciled with the perpetrators that sort of have affected the masses of your family? And do you think, as a whole, the reconciliation is on a good track?
I mean, I think it all means but what you mean by reconciliation. For example, me personally, the people who killed my parents or who killed my other family members, I don't know them. I don't know who they are. I don't know them personally. So I don't know who to forgive or who not to forgive. So I never met them. I don't know who they are.
Yeah.
So I mean, I was never confronted by that question because I don't know those people personally.
Okay.
So that's on a personal level. But I think I have never had any in my life. I've never had any feelings against somebody because he's from that ethnicity or because maybe he's a Hutu and the Hutus kid. I've never had any. Never had even an ounce of that kind of sentiment saying, okay, I'm not going to be friends with this person because he comes from an ethnicity that I kid. No, I never had that kind of thought. So, and I think, yeah, that's me on a personal level because I was so young, I didn't even know who did it. But let's say on a national level now, I think what reconciliation means is that people can live together in peace. You have you're a survivor. You say you're Tutsi and you have a Hutu neighbor. You live in peace. You're not going to attack him. He's not going to attack you. You're going to do business together. You're going to do trade together. I think that has been achieved on a big level because people work together. People, they might have some hate in their heart. They might have some judgment in their heart, but in the end, the nature of life forces these people to live together, and so far they live together peacefully. I mean, of course, there are a few. There's like some incidents here and there where you hear somebody has killed another person, somebody has killed a survivor, but these are like, I think they are the minor incidents. I think the majority of people live together, even though of course the trust is not 100% there. Especially from the generation of that lived through the genocide. But I think that for me, that's what reconciliation means. As long as we live together and as Rwandans and don't abuse each other verbally or physically, that's reconciliation for me. It's not reconciliation is not about hugging each other and this is more about like if I let you live in peace, you let me live in peace. I think that's already a great deal of reconciliation.
Okay. That's very good. So now my last question generally is, what do you think the world got wrong, and what do you think the world can learn? So lessons learned from Rwanda, the Rwanda story, the progress of Rwanda. So yeah, what do you think? Has the world learned its lesson? Has the world misunderstood what happened in Rwanda? And yeah, what can we take from that?
I think I would say, let's say from an African perspective, for example, I think that one of the lessons that people can learn from Rwanda is that, I mean, you have to think and shape your country's vision and your country's identity yourselves, and not wait for anybody else to come and do it for you. Let's say, if you wait for the world to come and stop whatever is going on, and if you wait for the world to do the world never cares. Let's say you have to do things yourself. That's because in the genocide, while the genocide was happening in Rwanda, nobody came to help Rwandans. Nobody came to. People dismissed it, even though it was in front of their eyes. So I think the big lesson is, like, you have to know that you have to do things your own. You have to look within yourself, to look for your own solutions, and to look for your own way of advancing forward, and also use means that come from you, that are not imposed by somebody else, because you understand your society better and you understand yourself better. I think that is the best. That would be the biggest lesson.
Okay, that's wonderful, because the time is running out. So no, I mean, it's been absolutely wonderful and profound to have you on. Thank you for coming on to the A4D. And this is the 30th commemoration of the Rwandan Genocide with Samuel Ishimwe, a filmmaker from Rwanda, has given us a full rundown, personal and historical. Thank you so much for coming on to our podcast.
Thank you very much.
I am an African.